All right, how's it going, guys? Another Vaseline with Stu. This is something different. We are, by the subject of the title, bridging into ASL. I simply go over an ASL scenario, in this case, Gavin Take, show you the map, show you some of the pieces and some of the concepts. I think that new SK, well, not new SK players, but experienced SK players can take some rules and start incorporating those slowly into their ASL game. It's not all inclusive. It will not be a training seminar. If you want training and more details of the rules, feel free to visit Neil Euland's site, the Advanced Squad Leader Academy, and he has lots of information on techniques. Bypass movement, number one, is a huge part. He will get around to covering some of the more detailed rules examples. So stick with his program and he'll lead you on your way into going into ASL. And if you are an SK player, go watch his stuff because that's solid and it will focus you on what you need to know and how to execute in SK as well as ASL. Anyway, this is sort of like my top 10 of getting into ASL. It's not necessarily picked by any stringent methods or methodology. It's just simply my opinion, and these are some of the things that are used more often in a game or might be trickier in a game, and you'll see some of those examples. Some concepts are constant throughout ASL that you don't experience in Starter Kit. So those are some of the new concepts you'll have to master to improve and be able to maintain your game standard where it is or exceed that standard and become even a better ASL player than you are now. So anyway, review it. Let me know what you think. There's probably hopefully not too many errors, but again, go by the basic concepts. You'll have to get some ASL rules. Get them from wherever you can. First edition's fine. Second edition's fine. Electronic edition is excellent. It's easy to access, number one, primarily. And so therefore, just use whatever rule book you have. This is, again, not going to teach you the rules per se, but just get you familiar with the rules that you should be coming across. Okay? Let me know how it goes. And then if you want some suggestions on, or if you want to give me some suggestions on other rule sets that you might think of wanting to incorporate, again, it won't be necessarily instructional, but more just kind of like top 10 list sort of thing. All right, we'll see you at the end. This is the Gavin Take scenario T1, free download from MMP. Go get it. It is also, I believe, in the ASL Classic magazine. You could get that from Wargame Vault for $6. That would be a good pickup. It's got a couple decent articles in there and some decent scenarios, some classic scenarios. But I think it redoes a lot of the squad leader scenarios, converts them over. But since you haven't played those, they're new to you. So any new scenario that you've never encountered is a new scenario for you. It's not an oldie. It's not a piece of garbage. You know, these are classic scenarios for the old timers that probably would never play them again, but that's beside the point. The point is, they're scenarios. Anyway, Gavin Take, I think this would be a fine introduction to the bridging ASL, simply because it's a small scenario. It doesn't even have sniper rules in it, so the sniper activation numbers are 0. So you don't even have to worry about that, leaving that little technical difficulty or technical rule out, because technically in this scenario, it doesn't exist. So no big deal. This is the ASL version, or actually Chef ad hoc Chef Dupont is the SK version of Gavin Take. The Americans come on, 2 different forces, strong leadership, get past the Germans, get off the board. I honestly believe that ad hoc Chef Dupont is a better scenario, So that's my opinion for what it's worth. I think it's a more exciting scenario, and I just think it's the terrain is better, things like that. This one's very, very close, very tight in, not a lot of long range fire. Really favors the Americans with their firepower and their leadership. So the Americans should dominate in this one pretty much every single time. Simply because if any American units break, the leadership's going to bring it back instantaneously. And that's a simple fact. You know, smoke, you're only going, you know, there's one roadway as you see here on the board. You go past the one roadway, you smoke here, you get across the road, you smoke here, you get across the road. You know, you smoke here, you get to the exit hex. At Chef du Pont, you've got to be a little more imaginative on exactly where you need to smoke. Lines of sight need to be dealt with, you know, very rigorously in that particular scenario, because you have a couple mediums, I think a couple lights as well, that as you well know, being SK players, that the boards are very porous. As you see here, board, you know, building S8 really takes up the entire hex. You know, these are atypical starter kit boards or starter kit buildings. Starter kit buildings are probably a lot smaller. This building will probably be a half the size, and like any of these units down here, you could probably see an LOS pass to the woods over here. So ASL boards are going to be a little tighter. Look how big these woods are. Big fat woods, not a lot of LOSs past them. They're all very large. This one's probably your smallest woods on the board, other than J2 over here. But we're simply just going to go in my suggestions for what it's worth. If you're coming from SK, going into ASL, start the scenario, start any other scenario that doesn't have a lot of particular units. The Americans don't even have support weapons, so you don't even have to worry about that from an SK perspective in terms of adding more rules. The Germans do have 5 machine guns, and that's it. It's just infantry versus infantry. So the first thing I would like you to introduce, I'm going to introduce them on a per phase basis on how the rules will apply. Obviously, some rules will apply throughout all phases of the game, and those are obvious. Those doesn't really matter. So I got to make sure I got all my units here. 6, okay. And got it. I think these are extra. Second over here. So rally phase. The 2 items of important I would like you guys to start using in your bridging ASL is initially deployment. Deployment means the voluntary breaking down of a squad. In this case, let's say take our 747 here, or 747 here. Taking down a voluntary breaking of a squad. You have to pass a task check with a leader that is in your hex at the beginning of the turn. I'm not going to go over these rules specifically. I'm going to go generalize over them. You can read quite well, I'm sure. If not, you can have somebody read to you. And so what happens is if you pass a task check based on your morale factor and your leadership, you may split that unit down into its constituent half squads. As experienced starter kit players, you should know the value of half squads and the negative aspects of half squads. Typically, half squads, low morale in the back. These particular half squads do not have smoke making capabilities, etc., etc. But there are 2 units, and that can prove very, very powerful as the game progresses. And again, that's strategizing for the game. So that is deployment. The other item of note that I would like to suggest is the old my unit is broken. My unit is broken right here. He's DM'd in this building. I can't get him because my enemy keeps firing on him, keeps firing on him, keeps firing on him, and my medium machine gun is perpetually under DM and I can't get it. Okay, these guys are over here. Let's say he's in his woods right here. Perpetually under DM. I can't seem to roll my 5 or 6 or 7 or whatever the case may be. And I can never get that medium machine gun back into play simply because they just get annihilated. And so what I would like you to incorporate is the ability to take weapons from broken units. Only single man counters may do this, and I'm not sure if it's leaders or not, but that's up to you to read up on it. Again, this is not a specific, rigorous going over the rules. Instead, because each unit has one action during the rally phase, this leader can choose to rally that unit, or, as the rule I'm adding for you guys, or I'm just suggesting for you, is you may try to take that weapon from that unit. So it's just a simple recovery roll. Roll your d6, anything but a 5, unless the other modifiers apply. Then the leader would have gained possession of that weapon. Now the broken unit's there. Let's say it's a conscript or what have you. It's never going to rally anyway, but you recover the support weapon, especially if it's a demo charge flamethrower or something that's going to save the game for you. In starter kit, you have to wait for this guy to die for the medium machine gun to be available. That was one of my pet peeves of starter kit, but again, rally phase activities, you simply get that, and that's all the leader can do. He can't rally any other units. He just picks up the weapon. Now, if you had 2 leaders, if I can find the other leader, if you had 2 leaders in that location, one leader could pick up the weapon, the other leader can rally the unit. Because each leader has an action independent of the other. Prep fire phase, very simple. The only thing I want you to add in the prep fire phase, and this doesn't happen very often, so it's not that big a deal, is opportunity fire. Why is opportunity fire useful in ASL versus SK? Why didn't they add it in SK? Well, in SK, typically if you're going to fire, just fire in the damn prep fire phase. Opportunity fire, in this case, these may be upside down. Say we have our stack of units over here in our giant freaking hex that keeps rolling around, and we have some concealed units in this building here. So obviously, if you are familiar with Starter Kit 4, concealments will reduce the firepower of units, and this is another rule I'm going to add, but we'll go over that in just a second. So for these units to be concealed, for them to be exposed to full firepower, they have to lose concealment. There are a number of ways you can lose concealment. Feel free to read those rules in Starter Kit 4, and the new download that MMP has on how to get rid of concealment and what concealment does to units. Okay? But the idea is if let's say if I go here and this unit fires on my unit moving in the open, now he will lose his concealment. If I had opportunity fired these units, which I'm just going to use a bounding fire counter because there are no op fire markers, this unit fires on this unit, let's just say he kills him. Gone, bye-bye. Now he has lost his concealment, and now he is subject to, in the advanced fire phase, full firepower from all the units marked with bounding fire or opportunity fire. So now the defensive fire phase comes, he's already first fired. He can't fire on anybody else, which means these guys, because they're not adjacent. And then the defensive fire phase comes and goes. Advanced fire phase comes. These units fire. You just leave it on them. Say, okay, I'm going to fire now. It's going to be 12. 14 firepower, reduced down to 12. Stone building +3, -3 leader. Boom, 12 even. And these guys break and die. So they break, and they're probably going to be routing, etc., etc. But that's the idea, is to break them later on. Have someone bait, lose their defensive advantage, and have some other unit that has line of sight to that location that's typically in a good defensible position, sometimes out of range to these units. And then you simply fire at full firepower, full rate of fire. It's as if you're delaying the prep fire phase to the advanced fire phase. And not used very often by a lot of players, but can be very useful. All right, and that's the only thing I want you to add in the prep fire phase. Pretty simple. Just delaying your attack. Movement phase. Simple. Everyone knows this one. Everyone bitches about this one. Bypass movement. Okay, starter kit. This unit's on this building, on this board here. We want to go in to this location over in P3. How do we get there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then you're done because you can't go anymore. Okay, because 6 can't take you over the wall. It's 5, 6. These are hedges. Hedge rules are available for you to download from the MMP website. You may read upon them. I think the new rulebook has them. Not sure. Check it out. They're available for free. So anyway, what you could do is when you counter exhaust this unit or double time this unit, you may bypass buildings or woods hexes. And in so doing, you simply you expend the other costs of the terrain in the hex. In this case, it's open ground for this building hex. And you have to designate 1 or 2 hex sides that you are bypassing. And then you would simply expend movement factors as normal. 1, 2, bypassing this hex, I have to designate, in this case, I want to get to R4, so I have to bypass 2 hex sides to get to it, which costs 1. Bypassing 1 hex side costs 1, so it's 1 or 2, it's up to you. So I could either bypass this side or bypass that side. It makes a difference because if I bypass over here, defending units, let's say there's a defending unit in this building here with an LMG that wants to fire at me over here. If I'm bypassing on these sides over here, he could only trace LOS to the hex spines. So in this case, he only has 1 hex spine that he could trace an LOS to. Okay. Now if we bypass the opposite side, on this side over here, 1, 2 hex sides, let me move this pile of shit, then he could fire on any one of those hex sides. Also, he can trace LOS from his location to the location you are bypassing, and if it crosses the hex side you are bypassing, you are still eligible for that first fire movement in the open penalty and not assault movement, because you can't assault move while you're bypassing. So get these idiots out of the way. So that's the detriment of bypassing. You have to make sure you can't get fired upon. So we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 as we jump over the wall. We'd be stuck here before, and then the advanced phase we can get to a location on this side over here. That's the idea about bypassing. It simply gives you greater mobility to get past units, etc., etc. Now you can't bypass when the terrain touches the side of the hex. About 99.9% of your terrain does not touch the side of the hex. Sometimes you have buildings like this in R5, R6. That's pretty close to touching, but as long as there's a gap, you can bypass it. So you shouldn't worry or concern yourself about that. Most hexes have clear paths around the obstacles. Defensive fire phase. This is for the defender to help mitigate. I'm going to put this guy over here with his LMG. I'm not going to worry about the leader. To help mitigate the offensive and maneuverability advantage of the attacker. So we are going to incorporate fire lanes. Fire lanes is a special form of residual firepower. Okay. You simply place you have to announce you're placing the fire lane when you make the attack. So let's say this 337 moves here. We have our 447 and our LMG. We're going to fire group down to here. We're going to do a 6. Let's just say he's in the open. Shell hole's a new terrain feature. Read up on it. It's pretty simple, but let's just move in the open ground. So this is going to be a 6-2 shot, and the German says, I'm declaring a fire lane before he rolls the dice. Okay? So what the fire lane does is we all know what happens after the German unit fires on this. He will place residual firepower equal to half of the firepower that the attack was based upon. In this case, it will be 2. I had my residual firepower here a second ago. Oh my god. So what's going to happen is the LMG is not going, if you announce a fire lane, the LMG will not be incorporated into the residual firepower that the squad will leave behind, or the fire group will leave behind. In this case, this is the perfect combination that you want to perform in leaving residual. Why? Because 6 firepower, half of that is 3, which goes down to 2. And guess what? That's the exact same values the squad has. So the squad's going to leave 2 regardless of the LMG. But what the LMG does is it draws a line of fire straight down a hex row like this, or an alternate hex grain, which would be alternating lines of sight. So if he drew a line of sight to this location here, he could choose either side, 1, 2, 3, 4, or 1, 2, 3, 4 to the hex. And what it does is you place a special residual firepower counter out to the range of the weapon. This weapon's range is 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We place it here because we can't see this location here, so we're just going to end it here. And what that does is, if you look on the counter, okay, if you can see that, if you can't, it's out of focus and I gotta have a cheap shit camera, but it is a 1 residual firepower with an arrow and it says fire lane. So every single one of these hexes will have a residual firepower of 1 based on the LMG or machine gun. You use the column, you use the residual firepower fire lane of the column to the left of the firepower of the LMG. In this case, 3. Firepower 2, the left of 2 is 1, you place a 1 down here. So any other Americans, once you declare the fire lane, let's say this America comes along willy-nilly later, I'm going to go 1, 2, and I'm going to get over here to 3, 4. Instead, he takes a 1 minus 2 because the fire lane, the bullets are whizzing down this road. Okay? And then he'll try to get over there. Funny thing is about this particular location, if the American goes into this location here, what happens? You have a fire lane that's already established, and you have the residual firepower from the squad. So in this case, the fire lane attacks first, and then the residual firepower from the squad attacks afterwards. So not a good place to go. We want to avoid that, and then we want to go over here. So what it does is really curtail your opponent's movement typically. So there's a lot more rules on fire lanes, but that's pretty standard. It's pretty much what it is. There's some restrictions involved as the defender, and you'll have to read up on those. I'll let you do your homework. Okay, advanced fire phase. Again, all you're doing is you're executing your opportunity fire. Route phase. I want you to do your routing just as if you were doing starter kit routing. There's not going to be any prisoners. Just keep routing like you're doing. Essentially, the squad leader or ASL equivalent of the SK routing is no quarter has been invoked, which means you're always going to route away from the enemy unit, regardless of who it is or where you have to go. And then you have your standard failure to route options as well. So keep the routing the same as you've done in your starter kit. And if you follow Tactical Tuesday, you probably route pretty damn good. And this is just to avoid the prisoner rules, because the prisoner rules are, in my opinion, a mess. But you thought the routing rules were confusing. Yeah, you haven't read the prisoner rules. So just keep your route phase the same. Advanced phase, very minor difference, but could make a difference. So typically we have a unit in starter kit that wants to advance from this location to that location. Well, the movement factor cost normally involved in the movement phase would be 4 movement factors. So in starter kit, this unit would be counter exhausted. And it's the backside of a concealment counter. We simply counter exhaust that unit. Okay? Because it's 4 movement factors, or all of the units. Well, it's 4 movement factors in or all of the units movement factors. In starter kits, all the units movement factors. Okay, ASL, and so he's counter exhausted. If in starter kit, if you had a leader with him, now they have 6 movement factors, and he would not be counter exhausted. ASL says, we don't give a crap if you have a leader there or not. If the hex costs greater than or equal to 4 MF, or all of your units movement factors, which would be like conscripts, then you become CX. So Mr. Leader and Mr. Squad going up there expend 4 movement factors. They technically don't expend 4 movement factors, but the cost to enter that terrain would normally be 4 movement factors. Then these units would become counter exhausted, as it's an advanced versus difficult terrain. Very subtle difference between SK and ASL. Incorporate this concept into your gaming, and it will come into play here. As you see, it will only come into play with the woods hexes that are at higher elevation. So technically you only have 4 locations this will even occur on this map. Okay, but it can occur because the Americans will enter on Y1. He might consider go to W4. He might advance up from X8 to W8, etc., etc. The Germans might come this way and do the same thing. So very simple rule. It might not come in this scenario, but incorporate it because it's one of those little teeny tiny changes between the two systems. So that's the advanced phase. Close combat phase. This is the best thing. Close combat is not a disaster as it is in starter kit. You go into close combat, you are not leaving until somebody's dead. Okay, we have close combat in ASL. I'm going to ignore this LMG here. We're going to go into close combat with this 467. Okay, so we enter close combat, we go into melee. I don't have a melee counter. Just imagine them being in melee, and they love melee. So yeah, I didn't clip it. Whatever. So what you can do is, after melee has been established, so after the first close combat phase, you would put a melee counter on it. Subsequent close combat phases, either side may declare to withdraw from melee, which means I'm done, I'm leaving, I'm taking my guns and going. Problem is there's a detriment in doing that. The attacker announces first, so if it's the American's turn, says I'm done with close combat, I need to leave because the game's continuing on, I'm getting drugged down in this close combat phase far too long, I'm leaving. So you simply announce that you're withdrawing from melee. What that does is it gives the Germans a -2 dice roll modifier against you. So that's bad. But there are certain other rules that you can come into play. Withdraw from melee is a very small section of the close combat section. And when you withdraw from melee, and if you have essentially units behind covering, then essentially you're not attacking and you're just leaving. You may be attacked. This 467 may attack you, and you won't be able to kill him. Let's say, yeah. So the 467 still has a choice of targets, regardless of whether you're withdrawing or not. Again, a couple modifiers, easy to look up, but what that does is it allows you to leave melees with penalties and continue moving on and doing what you need to do. Now, you don't need units in there to withdraw. I can just withdraw normally, and hopefully he'll roll really poorly, and then I just continue the game just like that. Okay? Pretty simple. The other things that we're dealing with withdrawal from melee is if one side or if either side rolls a snake eyes, then after that dice roll is conducted, that and everything that it entails, which is more than one thing, which you can easily read up on, then if the German rolls a snake eyes against the American unit, let's assume it kills the American unit. Then the German also has the opportunity to leave the hex. Essentially what it's called is sort of like infiltration. He kills him so effectively, he surprises him so effectively, he kills him and he gets to move to a location of his choice. Okay, as long as it's not enemy occupied. So it's a good thing. The opposite effect of that is, let's say these two units are engaged in close combat. The American rolls first and he rolls a 12 against the German unit. Because it's a 12, and 12s are always bad, what the German unit can do is say, okay, since I haven't attacked yet, I'm going to just run away. And I'm out of melee. Now, if the German unit wanted to attack, he could attack instead of withdrawing, but then he wouldn't be able to withdraw after the fact. However, if the German unit happened to attack first, didn't get a result, and the American unit attacked and got a 12, the German unit could then withdraw. But he has to decide to withdraw when the 12 is rolled. So if you had already made your attack because the attacker goes first, then that's an advantage in that sort of instance. So again, it just allows your units on special dice rolls to be able to get out of melee, which are just perpetual, just death pits in starter kit, and leave the situation sometimes unscathed. Okay, the last thing I want you guys to include in your starter kit games, and that is what you see on the board already, are concealment markers. I don't want you to use the ASL version of concealment because concealment is quite extensive in ASL. It's pervasive in almost every single aspect of the game, and overruns and attacks and things like that are affected by concealment. What you can do is, if you haven't already jumped into SK4, again, simply download the free MMP rule set and read the concealment rules in starter kit and use the starter kit concealment rules. Okay, that's pretty close, or close enough to what most ASLers kind of use concealment for anyway in their understandings of concealments. So use the starter kit for concealment rules for every nationality, not just the Japanese and the Marines. So that's homework that you can do on that. And again, that concealment option comes into play. And again, with the opportunity fire that I described earlier, that incorporates more strategy for which you to use. Do I fire on this unit at half firepower, or can I get somebody to cause that unit to lose concealment? And then, because I was op fired, give me a counter. Because I was op fired, I then can fire on him at full firepower in the advanced fire phase. That's all I have for you guys now. This is enough stuff to get you going, starting to add some new things to your game plan, some new tools in your repertoire of weapons and tactics, and go out, play some games. There's plenty of ASL games that are infantry only with just a couple support weapons. There are thousands of them that are very small, just like Gavin Take. Grab a couple of them, play a couple times with these particular rule sets, and then if you want to play with some vehicles, just use the starter kit rules of vehicles with these rule sets in it as well, and you'll be on your way in transitioning into advanced squad leader. So obviously there's about 500 other rules I could have added here. You don't need to know those. You can pick up on those as you want. Again, heat of battle's one, a lot of other rule sets that you can look at, and just essentially there are chart forms. They're not really rules per se, they're almost like events. You roll a snake eyes here, an event happens, you roll in a chart, you do what the chart says, everyone's happy, everyone continues. So there's no strategy to those particular charts per se. It's just something that happens after you roll a special die, or a dice roll. So get out your rule sets, get a first edition ASL if you want. The rules are pretty much going to be the same for those. And again, don't worry about if you get it wrong a little bit. Get the basic concepts down and then play accordingly. And you'll start enjoying your ASL a little bit more. And if you don't like the extra rules, you've got your starter kit. So no problem there. But this is primarily for those players that want a little bit more out of their starter kit system and heading into ASL without playing Festoon Budapest or something like that. We want to start small and go in with a solid understanding of the rules that will be used all the time in ASL. Another important concept, and that is lines of sight. Your perspective on the battlefield has just turned three-dimensional instead of the essentially two-dimensional aspect of starter kit. You must understand how to develop your lines of sight and therefore be able to know what you can see on the battlefield and what you cannot see on the battlefield. Failure to do so will cause you to be put into precarious situations or situations where you think you might have a line of sight to an area, and you do not have a line of sight to that area. So if anything, you've studied the prep fire, the defensive fire techniques, and all the other little detailed mechanistic aspects of starter kit, lines of sight and understanding your topography essentially just grew tenfold in ASL. The reason why is the concept of blind hexes and blocking terrain has gotten a little bit more difficult. If you are three-dimensionally or spatially organized, spatially kind of wired, then this should be very simple for you. Other than that, you may have just to rely on just the raw technicality of the rules. So, you know, in starter kit, this unit here is on level 1. It can see over this hedge because it's a half-level obstacle as defined by the starter kit hedge rules, and can see all these locations down here to R8. Because it's on level 1, this is a 1-level obstacle in R8 and may not see S9 simply because that is defined as a 1-level obstacle. Same thing as everything else down here. This unit on the first level cannot see past any first level obstacles. If he were to be placed on second level, the entire equation changes. A unit on L7 could see over M7, but not to any other terrain at a lower elevation than the location that he's in, because that's a level 1 height advantage. This obstacle goes up to level 1, so therefore this 247 can essentially see over this obstacle, and I'll move the map. He can see over this obstacle. Well, he can't see over that. He can see over this obstacle to other locations that are on level 1. These we'll get into in just a second. So that's the important part. Oh, here we go. So if he were in L6, he can see over M7 on the direction to U8, because U8 is also on level 1. These obstacles only go up to level 1, and so therefore that is a cleared line of sight from U8 to L6. You know this from starter kit. Okay, let's add into we're going to go to the factors of the buildings, and then we're going to go to the second level unit in just a second. Buildings. Single hex buildings do not change in starter kit to ASL. 1 level obstacles, 1 location in the building. Multi-hex buildings, as in T6, R5, R3, M5 over here. These contain multiple locations within the hex. What does that mean? That means there are, for this particular building, since there is no distinguishing stairwell location hex, as is defined over here, you see a square that defines where the stairwell is to get up and down the levels of that building. In this particular building, you may not get to the higher levels unless you use the stairwell. That does not apply to buildings that are multi-hex that do not contain that square symbol or a circle symbol, as the case may be in some certain special maps. So these buildings mean that they have 2 locations on ground level and then 2 locations on level 1. So what you could have is you can have German units on the bottom, and then on first level, which would technically be on top of them, when you use your regular maps, you could technically have American units on top of them. And so those are separate locations. Essentially, they're stacked upon one another. These units cannot leave the building unless they go down to the ground level and then exit the ground level from there. They can't jump out the window onto V6. Those are not considered adjacent. And I'll let you define adjacency in the index later. So this location has a ground level where the 447 is at, and a first level where the 80 is at. This 80 does not have line of sight to that 467, simply because there's a building in the way. But these units here in 447, the 80 have a line of sight to one another. The 447, the 467 has a line of sight because they're just adjacent to one another on the bottom. And the 747 and the 467 have a line of sight to one another because the 747 is essentially on top of it and it's looking down like the stairwells from there. So that's essentially adding two more locations within that building, and that's where the definitions of hex location are two different things. You may have control of the hex, but you may not necessarily have control of the location. But the control is irrelevant. You'll get to that later. So, being multi-hex, this essentially becomes a 1.5 level obstacle. What does that mean? You can picture it as if you had a unit in V6 and he drew line of sight straight across to L6, that line of sight would be blocked because T6 would be considered 1.5 level obstacles. It's kind of like a wall is on top of the building. You know, the crest of the building comes up to such a height that it blocks line of sight at that level. So this is a 1.5 level obstacle. This unit may not see this unit because just like if he were on ground level, if he were here and this unit were there, they may not see one another because of this half level obstacle in between them. Exactly the same thing, except these guys are in level 0. These guys simply just transition to level 1 in this example. Okay? Now we go to the second level and all levels above second level, and we go to the core of the ASL line of sight system. Second level units can see over 1.5 level obstacles and 1 level obstacles with ease. Okay? 1.5 and 1 level obstacles are treated exactly the same when you're talking about a higher elevation unit, which would be a level 2 unit. Ground level, level 1, level 2. A level 2 unit can look past a ground level, well, not ground level, but a level 1 obstacle to the next hex, only if that hex, in this case, this hex is clear, this hex is directly behind a level 1 obstacle. This is considered a blind hex. It may not see that terrain feature behind the level 1 obstacle. However, if you were to draw LOS, that's a clear LOS. Anyway, if you were to draw an LOS directly along the line here, right? So this particular instance, it would be blocked. This line of sight would be clear because it only draws of 1 blind hex beyond it. Let me give you another example. Here you go. We'll go from here. J6 going straight down this line. M5 is a level 1.5 level obstacle, just considered a level 1 because he's a higher level. N4 will be a blind hex because that's the definition. Blind hexes occur after each obstacle. However, if you are above it, and we are above it as level 2, the next one in line will be clear. Okay, so we draw 1, 2, 3 hexes to the target. The next hex is a blind hex. We cannot see that. So if the American unit were here, neither unit would be able to fire upon one another. However, if they go further away, because only 1 hex is generated at this range, now the 747 and the 467 can see one another because he's not directly behind the building. All right, that's straight up, straight and clear. He can see here, here, and here, but the 467 can't see M4 nor N4 because these hexes are at least level 1 obstacle and will block line of sight directly behind it. Okay, so what about units at range. Let's say the 747 were over here. This 467 can draw a line of sight straight through there to that hex there. Okay, same rules apply. He's directly behind an obstacle, at least a level 1 obstacle. That is a blind hex. This unit is not in line of sight of this unit, and vice versa. However, because of the distance to the level 2 unit, it creates additional blind hexes. The number of blind hexes it creates, the additional blind hexes it creates, is equal to every 5 hexes. So if that were a range of 0 to 4, like this is a range of 0 to 4, 1, 2, 3, if a building was in 4 hexes of a unit of a higher elevation, then it doesn't create any additional blind hexes. At a range of 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9, it will create an additional blind hex. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and the distance is not to the target, but to the obstacle. So you generate your range from your target, from your firer to the obstacle. That is a range of 3, 6, 8. That's within our 5 to 9 range, so it will generate 1 additional blind hex. So in this instance, the building itself creates its normal 1 blind hex, and because of the range is between 5 and 9, it will create an additional blind hex. So the line of sight drawn from J6 to T5 is also blocked because of the distance between the two. Now, if this unit were in U6, right, one more, this only generates a blind hexes of 2, the 1 normal blind hex because it's an obstacle, and then the 1 additional blind hex, which would be either one of these locations, because of the range to this obstacle, not to the target. So in this case, these 2 units would have a line of sight to one another because he's not within those blind hexes. Okay, and just like this location over here, this is a level 2, this is a level 2. Essentially, it's like they're on the same level and nothing else exists. So there are no obstacles on this map that go up to level 2 that would cause either of these units to be blocked. This unit could be here, it could be here, it could be here. All of these are level 2, all of these are level 2. Nothing in between goes up to past level 2. So therefore, these are clear lines of sight. And pretty much it's as simple as that. You know, let's take the 747's line of sight back this way, kind of down through here. Let's say he wants to fire on the unit in 06. All right, that's a straight line of sight. Is this sight blocked or not? If you said it was blocked, you would be correct. Why is it blocked? Because it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 hexes to 06. 06 will generate a blind hex by itself, and then the range to 06 will generate 1 more blind hex. In this case, the blind hex extends to 06. So those units do not see one another. Down here, it may or may not see it, but down here, he definitely does see it because he is well beyond the blind hexes of that particular line of sight, and he may be seen by the 747. At this point, he might be out of range. So knowing that blind hexes exist, you can freely move from here to here, knowing that he can't see you, and then you simply continue moving in all the blind hex areas from the 747. And therefore, you know, I think even this location is a blind hex. Depends if it hits here. So lines of sight are very important. Hills, read the hill rules. I won't go into the crest status or the hills themselves. They essentially, within 4 hexes, hills, because this is level 1, is not treated as an obstacle because they're gently sloping. If this unit were, say, right here, it can see a unit in this location. This level 1 hill does not create a blind hex 2 units above it on that same hill within 4 hexes. If it were further away, You know, say if these were level 1, hex is well beyond the end over here, because that's over 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That would create a blind hex. But this location would be in line of sight simply because that's only within 4. It does not create the blind hex for the hills. Essentially, when you're looking on the top of a hill to lower parts of the hill, you essentially extend that 0 to 4 range as other obstacles that we've described here create blind hexes, and you essentially extend that out to not 5, yeah, 5 to 9. So you can see 5 to 9, but you can't see blind hexes will be started to be generated after that. So actually 0 to 4. 0 to 4, no blind hexes. 5 to 9, the extra blind hex. Well, the blind hex will occur. There will not be an extra one. So anyway, again, just a general guideline, general description of the lines of sight. You need to do your homework. Read up on those particular rule sections on elevation effects and lines of sight in the rulebook. They are extensive, and you need to understand them to be well adept at seeing your targets, seeing where you can shoot, and what areas you can defend or attack in that case. Good luck, and we'll see you on the battlefield.